If you enjoy Earthshift podcast, you will love Lada's new book, Geopolitical and Geo-Economic Quantum Calibrations, the #1 new release in prophecies. Check it out on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Apple, and more. Connect with Lada and us on ladare.com. Join our advanced community with over 400 in-depth articles at patreon.com/ladare. Hello friends, welcome to Earthshift podcast, the enlightened truths about geopolitics, our past, present, and future, and so much more. This is your host, Lada. In this episode, we are continuing the theme from the previous episode. It is about Ukraine elections, and about Russia-Ukraine relations, as well as what else is going on in the Eurasian post-Soviet space. And in this episode, we are talking about the long-awaited, long overdue Russia's oil and coal sanctions against the Kiev regime. And we're talking about something especially long overdue and awaited by many, the Russian passports, as announced officially by Putin, for the people of Donbass and eventually for the people of an entire Ukraine. The developments are humongous. I'm sure you heard about it from other sources. As you know, we are doing geopolitics and we're doing global events, current events very differently here on Earthshift podcast. We are doing them from the enlightened perspective. We are doing them from the higher dimensional perspective. We do things that are totally cutting edge here. As you know, a vast majority of my predictions have already come true and they continue coming true. And my analysis is based on my Earthshift theory, my multidimensional theory, and also on my trademark quantum calibrations. There are many things that we will discuss in this Earthshift podcast going forward, including things that are well outside of the geopolitical field. But in this case, I really need to give you my enlightened update about everything that is happening regarding oil sanctions, about Russian passports, etc., etc. These things I started telling you in the past episode about Poroshenko, Zelensky, Putin, and who won Ukraine elections. In that episode, I explained to you what is really happening and how Russia treats Ukraine. Ukraine, Malorussia, and Novorossiya, that's the right way of saying it. This area, this is native for us. This is part of us. This is part of our hearts. Anybody who ever was separated from the part of themselves one way or the other, or from their family, will understand how this feels. You know, how do you separate me? I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian by birth. Well, again, Ukrainian, I basically object to this term. I'm just saying this word so it is comprehended by those people in the West and around the world who don't understand the true history and true meaning of these words. But in reality, my mother was from what is today Eastern Ukraine. She was born into the Cossack family, and that was quintessential Cossack territory, what is today the area of the Dnieper, between Dnipropetrovsk and Kryvyi Rog and Zaporozhye, that area. So it's like right next to Donbass, as a matter of fact. That's where Cossacks historically resided. There was Zaporozhskaya Sech, the organization which was like a quasi-state of the Cossacks, and they eventually insisted that Russia takes them in. It was a very small territory, lots smaller than Ukraine today. The rest of Ukraine was either parts of that were part of Russia historically, or they were in fact part of some other states, or they were basically a no man's land where there were a lot of bandits roaming. Many of them were Crimean Tatars and Turkic people who in fact were basically looting and trying to invade Russian cities and take hostages. That was years ago. That's medieval history. Of course, it's not forgotten, but it's forgiven, and everybody wants to live in peace in Russia. So what is happening with Ukraine? Russians wanted to do the same, live in peace with Ukraine. And my prediction, very key prediction from 2014 was that Russia, no matter what is happening in Ukraine, no matter what is said there, no matter the rhetoric, Russians will never forget that Ukrainians are a part of them. They are part of Russia and the Russian culture and the Russian world. And so they will very slowly, very carefully will begin remolding the situation back in Russia's favor, winning hearts and minds. Well, this is going very slowly, very tediously. So Russia has to turn to other countries in order to help them for the time being and bypass Ukraine. And it treated with kid gloves. That's actually what's happening. The rhetoric coming from the US, from Poland, and from Kiev is absolutely different. They're blaming Russia for everything. Russia is not doing this. Russia is not doing that. In reality, Russia is treating Ukraine with absolute kid gloves. I'm not going to focus too much on this today because what I do want to talk about is the sanctions and passports. So at one point, even angelic patience is over. Why was Russia waiting with oil sanctions that were proposed to have been done a long time ago and passports for Donbass this long? Very easy, very simple. Putin is very careful. He doesn't want to be an elephant in a china shop like US does, like Trump does. He does the opposite. He's super careful. You know, what also explains his personality is he's a Libra, astrologically speaking, by birth. Libras are the great balancers. They don't want to take any rash actions, and how fitting it is. I wrote about it on many occasions. I spoke in my best-selling webinar, The Putin Enigma, about this as well. Russia is the great balancer of the entire planet. And Putin, the president of Russia, is the great balancer within the great balancer. How fitting, right? So he will not make any steps that will be jerky, drastic, or in any way jeopardizing the existing balance, which might rebalance the whole situation. So he was waiting. What was he waiting for, you might ask? Poroshenko was getting worse and worse. Yes, Poroshenko was, but they were waiting for elections. And what they understood was that, in fact, the majority of people are very dissatisfied with Poroshenko and his rule. And that was shown by elections in spades. Look at this. Zelensky won officially with the result of over 73%. Poroshenko got about 24+%. And the rest of the people did not vote. They spoiled their ballots. And spoiled ballot means when they wrote something else, like Putin for president. That's what some people in Ukraine wrote. Basically, 75+% of people of Ukraine voted against Poroshenko. And you remember, I talked about it previously in multiple articles on Futures Chancast and Patreon. I said that Poroshenko styled his campaign as a vote against me is a vote for Putin. In Ukrainian, it sounds like this: Abo Poroshenko, Abo Putin. And so people voted against him. In the first round, he received only 16% of votes, and that's after votes were falsified, as widely acknowledged by many forces in Ukraine and outside. So votes were somewhat falsified, at least several percentage points were added to it. But let's just say that that was the real result. So he got 16%. That means that 84% of people voted for Putin and against Poroshenko. How's that for a result? And in the second round, he managed to rally a lot of support from various Ukraine Nazis, nationalists, Russophobes, etc. And those voted for him, even if they belonged to different parties which shared his Russophobic Ukraine-Nazi ideology. Just so that not to allow a Russian-speaking president, who is incidentally also Jewish, to be elected. But Zelensky still won with a result of 73%. What does that tell us? That Putin won with that excruciating for the Russophobic forces and Poroshenko result. And where we're at right now is that Russia can now act. So the sanctions that I'm talking about and the announcement of the Russian passports for Ukraine were made actually before elections. And the reason for that is that they waited for elections. They wanted to see some positive proof from Ukraine that the new president will be acting differently. Instead, Zelensky, during his campaign to save his hide, because he was threatened by Ukraine Nazis constantly, he started announcing that Putin was his enemy, anything that Donbass does is illegal, that he will never recognize it, that he will never pardon those people, etc., etc. Basically, he was negating the governing everything that goes on in Donbass, Minsk agreements. And Minsk agreements are sanctioned by the UN. So he did not realize what he was saying fully, but at the same time, I cannot blame him. His life and the life of his close people was threatened by Ukraine Nazis. There was even an attempt on his life, and those people were apprehended who were trying to wait in a quiet place, wait it out and see if they could, when he was passing by, they could shoot and kill him. Or at least it was a threat. Maybe they were just sending a signal. Maybe they did not intend to kill him per se. Bottom line, these announcements were a signal to Russia to act. And Russians acted. Number one, Putin announced that Russian passports now will be given out to the people of Donbass as a humanitarian gesture, because they cannot get anything from Ukraine. Ukraine is making very difficult for them to get pensions. Now they can get Russian pensions if they get Russian passports. And of course, they cannot move around because they do not have Ukrainian passports. Many of them for reasons of ideology. Others do get Ukrainian passports, then they can move around, then they're not confined to their little space. Russian passports will allow them to move not only around Donbass, but also around Russia freely, get jobs there, and of course, if they're elderly, apply for pensions, since Kyiv is stiffing them for pensions. And there are many, many other reasons for which this was done, humanitarian reasons. It's very clear that needed to be done. It is even recognized by those people who are not fully jaded and fully Russophobic in the West. Well, but Putin went further. Zelensky, deciding to somehow fight Putin's move to give passports to the people of Donbass, he announced that, if that's the case, then we are going to give out Ukrainian passports to Russians living in Russia if you are taking our people away. Well, they still technically consider Donbass their territory, although they act as if it was their enemy. And so people of Donbass, of course, do not buy this. But it is what it is. The Ukrainian situation, that schizophrenia is runaway in Ukraine. Well, what Zelensky said was mirrored by the Rada deputies who, foaming at the mouth, were saying, we are going to start giving out Ukrainian passports in the central Moscow to anybody who wants it. I would like to see how they will do that. Well, the truth of the matter is that Russians did some calculations. The truth of the matter is, in the past 5 years, according to the data that I heard, 2.5 million Ukrainians moved to Russia from Ukraine. At the same time, as far as I understand, 126 Russians moved to Ukraine from Russia. So 2.5 million versus 136 people. And that's official statistics. According to my statistics, up to 7 million Ukrainians currently work and live in Russia, or they might live there and then come back home after they worked for some time, made some money, and then they go back to Russia to work there again. And that's Ukraine alone. All of Ukraine, that is. Well, Donbass, of course, contributes dramatically to that number. But getting Russian passport is very difficult. And anybody who tried to get a Russian passport actually knows how hard it is. I have clients who come to me with this situation and want me to help them resolve it and calibrate for them and predict the future and advise them what to do. Sometimes they're not doing it right, so I advise them on which way to go. And what happens here is that a lot of people complain and some Ukrainians give up on it. The ones who know what they're doing, the ones who have staying power, of course, they keep getting Russian passports somehow. And even though it's difficult and slow and tedious, in the last year alone, over 80,000 Ukrainians got Russian passports. And that's with all the difficulties that this status implies. And now the simplified way of getting Russian passports is open to the people of Donbass. It already opened up in Rostov, which is right across the border from Donbass. They opened up an office, and there are big lines there already. First, Lugansk was given this opportunity. So the people of Lugansk can stand in line there, and there are like hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know, standing in this huge line trying to wait their turn to apply. That's how much of the demand there is. Now they're starting to also do this for Donetsk, and Donetsk is a larger area, so all these people will be going to Rostov. I have to tell you, I broke this news. This news was leaked by a Russian journalist in Donbass. That was a couple of months ago, and I broke this news. I wrote about it on Futures Gencast and on Patreon, where I said that the first passports are being given to the members of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics governments, their self-defense units, their militia. Militia is the police, as well as any sort of workers, government officials, etc. So those passports have already been either handed out or they're being handed out to those people who in fact are in government structures of some sort or in the defense structures of any sort and security structures. And these people have already gotten their Russian passports or will get them pretty soon. Now the people who are come from the street, they have to go to Rostov to get those passports. So the storm started in Ukraine and in the West that how dare Russia does these kinds of things. Putin explained it was for humanitarian reasons. And as I said, then they started saying that, what are you doing? We are going to do the same. We're going to give out passports to Russians. A lot of people started laughing at it and saying, no, self-respecting Russian in his right or her right mind will want a Ukrainian passport. But Putin actually played it really smart. He said, sure, absolutely, this is a terrific idea. Let's give out passports to each other. We give out passports to Ukrainians, Russian passports that is, and you give out passports to Russians. This way, eventually, we will again become one people, as we are meant to be, because we are, in fact, one people. Well, the move was brilliant. This is the chess master at work right there. I just love what Putin did. That he completely negated that whole hysteria. He said, absolutely, we're ready for it. Moreover, he announced, Putin said that, hey, we are doing this for the people of Donbass right now, but we are considering in the near future also starting to give out passports to the people of the entire Ukraine. Whoever wants to become Russian citizen, it will be a simplified way of applying for the passport. Well, it's completely negated and turned around everything that, all the hysteria and everything that Zelensky and the Rada were screaming and yelling about. And I can't wait until it happens, because Russians and Ukrainians, as I keep telling you, are one people. Same with Belarusians. Of course, those who are in power in these republics, they do not want to acknowledge this. This is low consciousness talking people. I do not focus very much on low consciousness and earth shift and quantum calibrations in this series, because this is my strictly geopolitical series. Well, but this is a series that I want to release first, about Russia, Ukraine, Asia, China, North Korea. I want to release this now first. And then we will proceed to other series in which we will focus on my mainstay theories such as Earthshift, such as quantum calibrations, such as multidimensional universe. So stay tuned for that. We're also going to be doing a joint series with Oz. And I know some of you love hearing from Oz. And he will be joining us for this series that will be about all kinds of quantum healing and health, protection against EMF, protection against chemtrails, 5G, and many, many other things. So we'll talk about orgone, coils, we'll talk about a lot of cool stuff in that series as well. So all this is coming this year to Earthshift Podcast, so don't miss it. Now, going back to where we were. So the passport situation is brilliant. Putin outplayed everybody on the go, on the fly. It was somebody's question asked of him when he was in Asia, somewhere on the go. And he said, sure, we're all ready for it. Now the whole world is talking about joint passports. Why not for Russians and Ukrainians to have passports of both countries, because most of us belong with both. I was telling you that, so how do you separate me? Half Russian, half what is called today Ukrainian, but in reality that's Southern Russian Cossack. That's my heritage on the mother's side. And a lot of people feel this way. If they do not have relatives, or they did not study in Ukraine or served in Soviet military, Soviet army on Ukrainian territory, or they might have worked there, they will have relatives, they will have friends there. Sometimes they themselves have Ukrainian heritage and Russian heritage. And the majority of people in both Russia and Ukraine are like that. Belarusians are also in huge part are like that. But I will talk a little bit about Belarus in this segment. Maybe eventually we'll have something separate about the post-Soviet space or Belarus, because that's also a very complicated matter. And I describe a lot of the dynamic between Belarus and Russia, Russia and Ukraine, and Russia relative to the post-Soviet space in my new book, which I always recommend you pick up, because that's where you very inexpensively, ebook is only $9.99 US, and paperback is $19.88 at this point, which is also USD, and you can order it anywhere from Amazon, and there are many other sources such as Book Depository that ship worldwide. There are UK-based sources, Australia-based sources, EU-based sources, and on Amazon you can buy ebook from Amazon.com wherever you live in the world. It's a very inexpensive way to familiarize yourself not only with my quantum calibrations theory and practice, but also partake in my discussion and almost 1,000 calibrations. Quantum calibrations are very high dimensional matter. This is, I'm reaching into higher dimensions to do my quantum calibrations. They are something very special, and they get you to the bottom of the problem or the situation with any country. It's country calibrations, it's the calibrations of leaders, it's the calibrations of the military, the army of each country. Oftentimes it's also security as well that is included in that category, economy, solvency, sovereignty, and then my predictions and discussion from many countries. Most countries got their own chapters in the book, and I discuss some of the most extensive chapters belong with Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, and there are some other post-Soviet space chapters which are smaller, and calibrations, of course, for all post-Soviet states. And of course, I have all of Europe and EU. I have all of the Anglo-American world. I calibrate Africa, and I have an excellent article about Africa, past, present, and future, with calibrations of past, present, and future in Africa. Plus, I calibrated several countries in Africa, 2 of them very extensively with very extensive chapters. Then we, of course, have Latin America, all of Latin America, in fact. We have the entire world. As I said, I put the Anglo-American world, all 5 countries, with all very extensive chapters for each, in a separate category. And then we have the power index, and we calibrate superpowers, great powers, and I explain what those are. Then we have 10 global organizations, the most prominent ones. Then I also explain to you the importance of calibrating each category. Then there are also 7 business worlds that I calibrate and compare. Then I calibrate 8 world's most powerful people and explain to you what's what. And there are predictions, is chock full of various predictions and geopolitical analysis. You cannot miss this book. You know, this is such a great way to familiarize yourself with my enlightened geopolitics method, plus quantum calibrations, plus predictions, and there's so much food for thought. It's a reference book. You will be returning to it over and over again, because calibrations, even though they're current calibrations, some of them are future calibrations, of course. Despite being current, these calibrations will be true for years to come. Now, in the next episode, we are going to talk about oil sanctions. I wanted to mention it here, but I'm probably going to do a separate episode because it makes more sense. See you next time.